Subject T change here with the first ever Hypercube Labs exclusive episode of the Chaonautics R&D research special talking about books. I've done a few episodes on my own channel already, but this is a brand new format, brand new place, so I should give a little introduction. I am Subject T change of Chaonautics Research and Development, and after a recent hostile merger between Chaonautics R&D and Hypercube Labs, we have become a wholly owned subsidiary of Hypercube Labs, and as a consequence, we are now the official research arm of Hypercube Labs, which means that we are the only hypercubists who are in any way, shape, or form authorized to use think. Otherwise, you should always follow the rules of hypercubism and don't think. But here at Chaonautics R&D and talking about books, we engage in think. Think in the form of bibliophilia. I like books. I have a lot of books, and I read books about a lot of different things. And I'm interested in books. That's what the show is about. That's why it's called Talking About Books. I know it seems kind of obvious. Why do I have to explain it? Well, I have to explain it because a lot of people don't understand that it's a show about books. That's why I had to change things for the new show. And for those people who don't know, that's why now I do my book show in front of my books. So everybody can see that it's about books. That wonderfully obsolete medium, ink on paper. And because today, and I'm coming in right at the wire, it is the 23rd day of February 2023. There's a whole bunch of 23s, which means that I get to do my first episode, I think, of the year, and on Hypercube about Discordianism and chaos. So where to even begin? I mean, we could begin, with the science. Chaos, making a new science. Maybe. But I mean, do we really want to sit here and look at more pictures of fractals? Is that what we're interested in? No, that's not what we're interested in. So we're not going to be reading that book. We're not going to be talking about that book. Do we want to be talking about chaos in a religious context, say in a Christian context? No. We're not going to do that because one of my biggest fans, who will be mentioned later, isn't keen on that. Plus, it's not really what we're on about, is it? No, because we're not interested in Discordianism today because we're interested in chaos. We're interested in Discordianism today because it's the 23rd of 2023. We want to know about 23. And we want to know about the Law of 5. And we want to know about all that fun stuff. So that's what we're going to talk about. And the way that we're going to talk about that is by going through my personal collection of books about and related to the Discordian movement. First one up, not my oldest one, this is actually a new printing. It's the cool rainbow edition of the Principia Discordia. This is current to the 5th edition of the Principia Discordia. You can buy this edition anywhere. It's easy to get. And of course, the Principia Discordia in its entirety is available for free on the internet. I think it's principiadiscordia.com. I'm sorry, my cat's over there being adorable. But you can't really talk about the Principia Discordia right away because it immediately begs the history. Well, who wrote the Principia Discordia? Well, where's that normally written? It's normally written right next to the name of the book, isn't it? Yeah. Malaclips the Younger and Omar Khayyam Ravenhurst. Who are they? Well, this book, I think the introduction might hint at the right, might say who they are. Does it? No, wait. Yes, it does. It does vaguely mention some of the. It does vaguely mention some of the actual writers, but we're not going to go from there. We're going to go from somewhere else, because this only gives vague hints. This is really meant to be a religious text, but we want to talk about history. So we're going to pull out the Historia Discordia. The Historia Discordia has a few new writings in it from people involved in the Discordian movement, but most importantly, it has it's the most comprehensive history of Discordianism that is available, because it consists not only of information from former members and from the historian Adam Gorightly, but it also has facsimile information of some of the founding texts in the Discordian movement, like the Apocalypse Trade Journal, and all the way up to the first edition of the Principia Discordia, which is printed in this book in its entirety, the very first edition. I'm pretty sure this is a facsimile of serial number 1. Let me skip ahead to that part, because it should just be, yeah. You can see right here on the back. There it is. 105. Now, obviously, this is just a facsimile. But the possibility that there may have actually been differences between the 5, I don't know if that's true. I'm pretty sure that the first 5 were identical. But the possibility that there may have actually been differences between them, it makes number 1 feel special. So, but again, it's like, okay, but you haven't said anything about 23. Well, man, how do you get into 23? How do you just dip your toe into it? You can't just dip your toe into it. There's no way. Approaching the Discordian movement itself is like, because it gets wrapped up in so many things. You start with Principia Discordia, and it's like, okay, so it's a little bit of a goof. You learn a little bit more about it, and then you find out some of the other people that were involved. Like, you find out about Carrie Thornley. This is a new book. Just got this, and this is actually on the Subgenius imprint. Carrie Thornley's Jailbird. And you find out about Carrie Thornley's connections with Lee Harvey Oswald, and that he was investigated as a possible co-conspirator in the assassination of JFK, but he was also one of the co-authors of the Principia Discordia. And then, very much to the dismay of a lot of my self-identifying Discordian friends, Carrie Thornley was a right libertarian, not a left libertarian. Ooh, he read Ayn Rand. That's dangerous. Nobody likes people who read Ayn Rand, except, of course, people who read Ayn Rand. Yeah, so again, it's where to begin. You hardly can. So if you start just kind of from memory, you get 23. My first actual encounter with the 23 Enigma goes back to that really campy Jim Carrey movie, the number 23. That was my first encounter. And it's like, okay, this is awful melodramatic. And I didn't find out till later about its associations with, Discordianism. And then obviously, it goes back at least to William S. Burroughs. But what's interesting is when it gets involved and gets wrapped up in the project that the Discordians called Operation Mindfuck, and their deliberate use of certain kinds of disinformation to manipulate people. And there's some wonderful examples that wrap up with the number 23. Like, for example, well, I mean, because most of the people watching this, and hi, thanks for joining me. Sorry it's not more exciting. Like, for example, the Illuminati conspiracy theory. It's one of the old ones, one of the great classics. Goes way, way, way back. the form that it exists in today. Now there have been older forms of similar conspiracy theories that go back, oh God, at least as far back as the early 19th century. But the Illuminati conspiracy theory as we know it today is actually traceable back to a handful of correspondence between just a few people. But I'm pretty sure it goes back to at least, let's see here, 1967 is when it goes back. And it goes back to, and in the book that I have, it's connected with a couple pieces of correspondence. It's connected with this typewritten page, starting here and here, and then from the desk of Robert Anton Wilson at Playboy, signed Bob. And that's in 68. Yeah. And so it was a prank on the Playboy forum. The very first instance of the conspiracy theory as we know it today was a deliberate hoax on Playboy's forum. And in fact, they even put in a spoiler about that in the actual article, because here's the actual article from the Playboy forum, phase 1 of Operation Mindfuck, and it says at the very, very bottom, as for the Illuminati of Berkeley, this is a put-on by local anarchists. It's an acknowledged hoax in its first phase. It's in the very first phase of Operation Mindfuck. It was acknowledged to be a joke put on by local anarchists. And yet it ended up resonating throughout society and American civilization throughout the 70s and the 80s. And so that's fun. But again, it doesn't really tell us about 23. Well, 23 comes back to Operation Mindfuck. Because, so the argument that's made in Historia Discordia is that the 23 phenomenon was picked up from William S. Burroughs, specifically from the novel The Soft Machine. And then that was translated through the Discordian law of fives into the peace symbol, which was the V sign, which was appropriated from Winston Churchill, V for victory. They appropriated it as a Roman numeral V for 5 and made it as the Discordian V, but it ended up getting picked up by the counterculture, and the hippies started peace, man. And so supposedly, everything from Illuminati conspiracy theories to something as commonplace and mundane as the peace sign theoretically all go back to this handful of conspirators, Kerry Thornley, Greg Hill, and Robert Anton Wilson, and a few others. And this little tiny narrow grouping of people who ended up having things like the Chicago Cabal of the Discordian Society had the John Dillinger Died for Your Sins Society, and all this for what? Because think about it, now we know about 23. We know about the 23 phenomenon to the point where I'm doing a special episode just because there's so many 23s in today's date. So what was the point of this whole thing? This weird hoax to get people thinking about an Illuminati that doesn't exist and about secret societies and conspiracies. Because you want to talk about where the conspiracy theories, kind of all the research done by these guys gets distilled into this wonderful book, the Illuminatus Trilogy. And so this is basically, in this form, on the one hand, it's a very exciting psychedelic spy novel. of a kind. I like to think of the Illuminatus trilogy as the American equivalent of the Hitchhiker's Guide, in that it's a weird metaphysical kind of an adventure. But it also is a great time capsule of some of the most commonly believed and perpetuated conspiracy theories, as long as that's been going around. So you get this, which becomes a wonderful record, and it inspires people. This and Discordianism, and this is where I get to start being, I get to introduce one of the star pieces tonight, because, these people kind of taking advantage of weird thinking and unusual logic, and you'll see some of the correspondence that gets spread through the history using strange rubber stamps and different stationaries and so forth, gives this impression of a giant network of different organizations that are all up to weird things in this giant conspiracy. And well, what other kinds of worlds do we see that? Where do we see this huge network of just unusual ideas? Well, this got put together in this wonderful book that most of us know, High Weirdness by Mail by Ivan Stang. This is a very special edition of that book for me, because this one formerly belonged to the great subgenius Dr. Ghoul. And it has some, you can see, there's some stuff stuck in the pages. That's some of the bonus material that came in my copy of High Weirdness by Mail, thanks to Dr. Ghoul. But, you look at the beginning, what you see right at the beginning, you see Slack. And High Weirdness by Mail is this incredible document. I mean, what's the subtitle? Yeah. A directory of the fringe, mad prophets, crackpots, kooks, and true visionaries. That's already shades of language that you hear of language in the Principia Discordia, because you get language in Principia. Joshua Norton Cabal, surrealists, harlequinists, absurdists, and zonked artists melee. We are a tribe of philosophers, theologians, magicians, scientists, artists, clowns, and similar maniacs who are intrigued with Eris, goddess of confusion, and with her doings. If this book is not a collection of Discordian kooks, or at least a celebration of discord, then I don't know what is. And that's why, even though you'll see a kind of feigned distance drawn between them, there is an affinity between these organizations. And I don't think anyone who is actually involved would want to admit direct influence, but it's obviously there. And I find it interesting how people's opinions about the proper aesthetics of this should change. How, 1 minute it's Eris, well then it's Bob, well then it's Satan, well then it's this, then it's that, it's John Dillinger, and these sorts of changes, they come through, and you reach a point where now, there was a time where it was probably only a very, very few people had passing knowledge about any of these kinds of groups or any of these kinds of ideas, to the point now where, again, Jim Carrey does a movie about the number 23, and I can get The Agent Mr. Dobbs by Teeters LaVerge in paperback. Because I'm not anyone special. And yet somehow this stuff has managed to find its way into my library. The same kind of library where I keep stuff like Bullfinch and Aristotle and John Dewey, I'm also able to have some weird Discordian literature. Why? Because somehow that little joke about the number 23, that the mad ramblings of one junkie, that is to say William S. Burroughs, somehow managed to resonate in a way that we really care about. And even to the point where it gets transmuted and changed, and people find their own numbers. Just fans of the Hitchhiker's Guide series, of course, will be committed to the number 42. At least one person I know said they had built an elaborate mythology around the number 27. And of course, 13, the ever infamous number 13, and the associations with the betrayal of the Knights Templars, which alone in itself goes back to the conspiracy theories, because the Illuminati is always linked historically with the Knights Templar. And some people say that the Illuminati and the Freemasons, they are descended from the Knights Templar, and Friday the 13th takes on a unique significance. But today we get to have Thursday the 23rd. How often do those happen? Are they frequent? How many will happen this month? Because you think about it, if there's any real significance to the 23 Enigma, then really it should be next month, because you take the 23 and there's the alternative 23, which is the 17. 1 plus 7 is 8. 8 is 3 plus 2 plus 3, which is a fully rounded forward backward 23, 3, 2, 3. And so really the better time to do this video would have been March 23rd, 23, because then it would have been 3, 2, 3, 2, 3. But it got done today because this was the day when everybody seemed to be most aware of it, because, it didn't come up on 123. No one seemed to care on 123, but everybody cared on 223. So maybe we can do another more comprehensive video for 323 about the 23 phenomenon. And so the 23 phenomenon goes, 23 becomes 17, becomes 5, and the law of fives becomes universal. And again, we get to the point now where you can see here from this Chaos Magic Tarot card set, there's Eris. And this is the same, this is the same tarot card set that this has Bob in it as well. A tarot card deck with both Eris and Bob in it. Because that's coming from the Chaos Magic tradition. And the Chaos Magic tradition is obviously, there's not even any ambiguity about how obviously the Chaos Magic tradition takes after the Discordian tradition. There's a specific diagram that is all but an admission. Although there are more explicit cases, there's one specific diagram. I'll probably never be able to find it. And that's just fine. I'm never going to find it. But it's a study on the different directions that the pentagram can be angled. I knew it was in this one. Probably shouldn't waste any more time on that. But again, so the Chaos Magic tradition picked up on all these ideas, from Liber Null and Psychonaut with Peter Carroll, all the way up through Epoch and his other books. And I will eventually get around to doing a video on Chaos Magic. But again, today is more about thinking about the Discordian movement and eventually the Church of the Subgenius, which doesn't really use Bob or fives. I think the number 1 is probably the most important for for sub-Gini, one being the dollar. That would seem to be the most important number in that system. So here we are on the 23rd day of the 23rd year of the second millennium, or is it the third millennium? And everything is unchanged. Everything is the same as it ever was, where there is still nothing outside but chaos. And it begs the question to me at this juncture, knowing everything that we've learned, the scientists have touched on chaos, the mathematicians have touched on it, the mystics, the philosophers, the mathematicians, everyone is given, the poets, the artists, everyone has given their own take on chaos. And, after 2,000 years of imposing order, how come it hasn't stuck? And to this day, as much as I find, later approaches to thinking about, chaos in a less intellectual way, people like the chaos magicians, I think they found some interesting ways to talk about chaos. But then they end up talking about chaos as if it is something that can be controlled, that can be utilized and used as a tool. But does this make any sense? To talk about controlled chaos? What does that even mean? Can we even say that without admitting that we're using one of those two words ironically, and that the entire construction therefore is rhetorical? We say controlled chaos. Well, we mean either, because again, what do we mean when we say chaos? The dictionary wants to say that chaos is void, emptiness, a yawning abyss. It's not really what we seem to mean when we talk about chaos. When we talk about chaos in mathematics or in physics, we talk about randomness. And if we talk about chaos in a more aesthetic or even a political sensibility, then we tend to think of it as like a frenzy, or similar to randomness but with energy behind it. And then some people, they will take the more romantic interpretation of chaos, and they'll interpret chaos as energy itself, which is how many of the Discordians do interpret chaos. Well, and then you can even go back further into the Judeo-Christian tradition that interprets the void, the primal chaos, in its verbal sense, void as a spewing forth, that the world, that is to say the universe, was spewed forth by the void. That's what it means for the world to have begun in chaos. Doesn't mean that there was matter randomly moving that just spontaneously, orderly moved. No, there was a yawning, gaping void, which the Norse tradition called Gnungagap, and spewed forth from that abyss was the universe. It's the classic cosmological myth. It's even attested in the Christian tradition. The tradition of creation ex nihilo. And so we're left yet again. Well, we say all this, but what does it all mean? What I want to say is, what does it mean to talk about the meaning of chaos? It's just there. It is what it is. And at that point, even when the universe, if we look at it in terms of chaos and order, just is what it is, well then, why worry? 23 years into this new millennium, nothing's changed. Anyone with even the slightest grasp of history can look at the world outside their own window and even through the window of media. And if you have even the slightest understanding of history, you know that nothing has changed, nothing is different. Everything is status quo. And the funny thing about that, at least to me, is that you get to say the phrase that chaos is status quo. That's a fun sentence to say. At least it gives me a lot to think about. And so, I'll keep this one short, a little bit chaotic. But yeah, I'll be doing this more often, and because I have a suddenly new place to see. Hopefully the resolution is high enough that people can see the books. Eventually I'll do an episode where I do a more in-depth introduction to my library, so I can take requests and talk about books. And of course, eventually I'll try to be doing a live stream, and I'll be able to talk with you about books. If there are books you like, I'd love to talk about them. If you hate books, I'd love to talk about it. But in the meantime, hail Eris, all hail Discordia, praise Bob, construct additional pylons. This is Subject T Change, signing off.